Well, everyone, it's now time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra and see how this particular device holds up in 2025. Now, the first thing to kind of keep in mind here is that with this particular phone, it was a very, very good phone when it first came out. I do think in this day and age, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to go and buy these types of devices just because they are just a tad bit outdated. But we'll take a look at how this phone still holds up, the pros and cons, and everything in between. Now, if at any point you want to go and buy this phone or some other phones I'd recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description below. You can get that from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy Note 20, the first thing to remember is that this phone came out back in 2020. So this phone is approaching 5 years old this year. And it's kind of surprising because when you do take a look at this device, you probably wouldn't even think that this is like a 5-year-old device. Like this phone still holds up so well in so many ways. Now on the front side, you are getting a 6.9-inch dynamic AMOLED display. Now this type of panel was one of the biggest size panels they've ever made at that moment. Very, very thin bezels on it. This was a very good send-off for the Note lineup because this was the last Note phone they basically ever made. So this thing had very thin bezels on it. You were getting like 120 Hz display on this thing too. And this is without a doubt one of the coolest phones Samsung's ever made, right? It had so much capability. It was a very good looking phone without a doubt. Now, when you take a look at the bottom side, this phone was still giving you a USB Type-C port, which is great, but it was also giving you an S Pen. This S Pen, the stylus, is one of the coolest things Samsung threw in their phones too. It gave you the capability of basically going through, unplugging this thing, using it as you normally would as a stylus. And this was another really awesome thing that Samsung kind of threw in here. And once again, personally for me, if I was to go through and look at this phone, it was a really nice thing to basically have because it gave you kind of like this one up compared to a lot of other phones in the market. Because phones may have been faster, they may have had better cameras, but this phone kind of had it all. And it was giving you that stylus that you can use built in. That was such a cool thing going on for this type of device when it came down to it. So, in my personal opinion, this was a really, really cool thing going on for this type of phone. On the backside, you were getting this frosted glass back, which still held up very, very well. You were getting wireless charging, reverse wireless charging. You were also still maintaining this triple camera setup kind of, on the backside as well. So that was another really big thing going on for this type of device too. So going through and getting that type of capability was such a nice thing, right? So we'll take a look at the camera in a second and we'll take a look at everything else going on for this phone too. But I will tell you on the outside, this is definitely one of the coolest things going on for this phone. Now, when I look at this phone and I look at kind of how it compares against the latest competition, there are a few areas of this phone that might not hold up the best. Number one, this particular phone doesn't have the brightest panel of all time. So this phone from that area may not be the best. It is missing out on a few things here and there. On top of that, you're still maintaining really good stuff. But, I will say the lack of, but even beyond that, I honestly can't think of that many other things specifically for the outside that is missing out on. From a price tag side, this phone still costs about $300 something in the used market. So that is a pretty cheap type of price to pay for this type of phone. So you might look at this phone from that standpoint and think to yourself that this is like a really, really good priced phone to buy. And it is a much cheaper priced phone than you'd probably expect, from a phone that has this type of exterior. But there are some critical reasons why I probably would not recommend buying this phone. But that doesn't have to relate to the camera, which I'm going to talk about right now. This phone is giving you a triple camera setup on the exterior. It's giving you a 108 megapixel wide angle lens, a 12 megapixel periscope telephoto lens, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. On the front side, it's giving you a 10 megapixel wide angle lens. So from that side in and of itself, having that type of capability and getting a phone that's going to be giving you this type of camera, it honestly is a very, very decent type of camera, even in this day and age. The reason for that, number one, you're getting 4K at 60 on the front and the back, but you're also getting 8K capability that you can film in. Having 8K capability is amazing, even if it's 8K at 24 frames per second that we have here. That is such a cool thing to have. And that really makes me very, very happy about owning a phone like this. So I do think this in and of itself is still a really, really nice thing to kind of have at the end of the day. If you are going to go through and buy a phone, like I said before, that is a really nice thing to have. Now, it really is not the best type of camera of all time, and it's definitely going to be showing its age nowadays, especially when you look at a lot of phones nowadays, right? Because a lot of the phones now are giving you better type of capability, better types of way the camera looks and everything like that. But I would kind of imagine that if you are still going to go through and buy this phone, the camera would probably be one of those areas that you probably wouldn't be complaining about too much. Like, I do think from that side, it is actually like a decent thing to kind of think about with this type of phone. So from the camera side, still not perfect, but it's still not terrible either, which is still really, really interesting because it was one of the better cameras of that year. Now, beyond that, some other big things to keep in mind here too. Within this type of device, you are basically still going through and maintaining you are getting a couple of software updates on this phone. So it's supported from Android 10 all the way up until Android 13, but this phone is basically done getting software updates. And it's interesting, I think a lot of people still want this phone to get supported with software, because every time I make some sort of device update of whenever there's a new One UI device, a lot of people are still going through and wishing this phone was still supported with software, which is still interesting, because if this phone was still supported with iOS updates, I would probably still recommending this phone to people. Like I would still be like, hey, you should consider buying this phone. So it is very, very interesting to me how good of a job this phone actually does from a software performance perspective, or at least how many people want it to be still supported with software. But it's no longer supported with software anymore. So because of that, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go and buy this phone. So I would hate for you to go through and buy this type of device if it's already done getting software updates, right? So that is essentially the problem that we're having now. So that's why I would highly look at other devices to go and buy rather than this one. So when it comes down to the software side, just kind of keep that in mind. And when it comes down to the battery, this phone is still going through and giving you, a massive size 4,500 milliamp hour battery, which is still very, very big for phones nowadays. So once again, if you are going to go through and if you're going to pick up a phone, it is actually very nice to be able to go through and buy a phone that is going to be giving you massive size batteries like this one. So that is kind of a nice thing going on for this type of phone too. When it comes down to the performance, this phone is giving you a Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset inside with 12 gigabytes of RAM. That is a decent chipset to have inside of a device, but that is a massive amount of RAM to have inside of a device too. Like being able to go through and buy a phone like this that's going to be giving you that type of capability is awesome. Again, it's not perfect, but it is a really, really cool thing to have here. So this phone is still actually not bad when it comes down to the performance side. It's definitely not perfect like I mentioned, but it's definitely not terrible either. And I think that's a really nice thing going on for this type of phone. The fact that you can buy this type of phone at this type of price tag, not really spend an insane amount of money on it, but still get a very decent performing device like you can on this phone. So in my personal opinion, when I look at this device, right, this would not be the first phone I'd recommend people to buy anymore. And this would not really be a phone I'd recommend people to buy. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense for people to pick up this phone anymore. I think it makes a lot more sense for people to buy a phone that is still supported with software, that still has a future ahead of it. This phone doesn't have a future ahead of it, and that's kind of the situation we're in. But I think for a while, this phone was still interesting. I think this was still a very interesting device, but I just don't think this would be a phone I'd recommend people to buy anymore. I would recommend people to buy something like a Google Pixel 8, a Google Pixel 8 Pro, a Google Pixel 9 Pro XL, a Samsung Galaxy S23 Plus, a Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, Galaxy S22 Ultra, iPhone 14 Pro Max. Those types of phones I'd recommend people to buy. I would not recommend people to buy this particular phone when it comes down to it. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there too. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.